Right. I told you that this class, welcome everyone, first of all. I told you that this class, because essays are being handed in, thank you, by the way, for those of you who've sent me your essays, look forward to reading them. But I said that this class, we would do something a little different. I wouldn't require you to do the reading in advance, that we would read together the text I have in mind, which is from Ovid's Metamorphoses. This, by the way, is the famous account of, as in the picture here, is from Echo and Narcissus. Narcissus is loved by a nymph because he's the most beautiful man in the whole world. The nymph loves him, but he doesn't love her back. He loves something more beautiful than the nymph, namely himself. He looks at himself in a pool, sees his own likeness, and wants to draw near to his own likeness, and drowns in the pool and is transformed, metamorphosized into a flower, now dearly beloved of the nymphs and so forth. That sort of account of the development of the world is typical of Ovid. Ovid is writing contemporaneously with Virgil in the very same era, and he's also writing an epic, I should hasten to say. But unlike Virgil, Ovid was never favored amongst the Roman establishment for his account of what constitutes epic subject matter, in large part because Ovid, in keeping to some degree with what Virgil told us about the Romans, namely that they are under the patronage of the goddess Venus, the goddess of love, is so dedicated to Venus that he writes a series of works, one of which called is Ars Amoris, the art of love, and practices it in his life. Among other things, he has a relationship of some sort with the emperor's niece, I think, which the emperor did not approve of, and got himself banished for it. But the Metamorphoses is a series of stories metamorphosizing, evolving into one another. Like the one I just told you about Echo and Narcissus, as I say, portrayed here in the youth Narcissus, from which we get the word narcissist now from this tale. Self-admiring, seeing his own image, loving his own image. That is typical of the Metamorphoses. We have an interaction between the gods and men, often a lot of nymphs, and the natural world. And it gives us an account how the gods interact with the human world and also the creaturely world, and everything changes into everything else. There's no distinction really between the gods and men and the creaturely order, but it's all constantly. And so it's an evolutionary account of life. Entirely amenable with the view of life that we see in the pagan Greeks as well, where if you looked at, and I didn't look at this, but the Greek epic writer Hesiod also gives an account of the origin of things, with an appeal to primeval chaos. So they see the ultimate nature of reality as chaotic in its beginning, and then something happens to change that. And gods come into the scene and they change things and so forth. I'm going to give you Ovid's account rather than Hesiod's account because of the time period. And then I'm going to cast it and present it against the backdrop of Genesis, where we get another account of the origin of things, but we will call that a creation account because there's a creator behind it, whereas in Ovid we don't see that. But I'll show you that in a second here. Let me just put this down a bit. And let me just read from Ovid here, and then I'll read from Genesis, and then I'll make some comments about it, and we'll compare and contrast. And I'd like you to then just to think about, first of all, you're going to note the similarities. They'll, I think, at any rate, I think you'll find the similarities in the accounts rather striking, and it'll make an impression. You might think they come from the same source. I don't even want to comment on that per se. What I'm going to do is comment on, yes, the points of similarity, which are pretty obvious, but also the key points of difference. Because the account given in Genesis is so different as to constitute a different type of theology, but also a different account of how humanity ought to relate to God, and also how we relate to the natural order. It says to us something about human nature and the distinctness of human nature as opposed to the rest of the created order, etc. All of those things will weave into it. So at this point in the semester, it's just sort of a step back and thinking through the implications of some of the texts that we've looked already, and to try and bring some sort of a Christian integration with it in a more explicit way than I have done in most of the classes. So let me begin here. I'll read this. Again, Ovid's Metamorphoses, first book 1. The subtitles are put in there by the editor afterwards. They're not in the text, but still, they're subtitles for a reason. Ovid writes, I want to speak about bodies changed into new forms. You, gods, since you are the ones who alter these and all other things, inspire my attempt and spin out a continuous thread of words from the world's first origins to my own time. So right here at the beginning, before I carry on, we have an invocation. It's the poet speaking to the gods, the muse, actually. It's an epic account. He's calling on the gods to tell him how to tell his tale. So it's in that same framework that we saw Homer and Virgil began their epics, with a reference to a subject matter, but a call for the gods to give utterance to what he's going to write, because it's a tale that's bigger than any old poet can tell. And now he's talking about the origins of all things. So then he breaks into it, just like Homer does, and just like Virgil does. Before there was earth, or sea, or the sky that covers everything, nature appeared the same throughout the whole world. What we call chaos, a raw, confused mass, nothing but inert matter, badly combined, discordant atoms of things confused in the one place. There was no Titan yet, shining his light on the world, or waxing Phoebe renewing her white horns. Both reference, the Titan is the sun, and Phoebe the moon. Or the earth hovering in surrounding air balanced by her own weight. Or watery Amphitrite, stretching out her arms along the vast shores of the world. Though there was land and sea and air, it was unstable land, unswimmable water, air needing light. Nothing retains its shape. One thing obstructed another, because in the one body, cold fought with heat, moist with dry, soft with hard, and weight with weightless things. This conflict was ended by a God and a greater order of nature, since he split off the earth from the sky and the sea from the land, and divided the transparent heavens from the dense air. When he had disentangled the elements and freed them from the obscure mass, he fixed them in separate spaces in harmonious peace. The weightless fire that forms the heavens darted upwards to make its home in the furthest heights. Next came air in lightness and place. Earth, heavier than either of these, drew down the largest elements and was compressed by its own weight. The surrounding water took up the last space and enclosed the solid world. When whichever god it was had ordered and divided the mass and collected into separate parts, he first gathered the earth into a great ball so that it was uniform on all sides. Then he ordered the seas to spread and rise in waves and the flowing winds and pour around the coasts of the encircled land. He added springs and standing pools and lakes, and contained in shelving banks the widely separated rivers, some of which are swallowed by the earth itself, others of which reach the sea, and entering the expanse of the open waters, beat against coastlines instead of riverbanks. He ordered the plains to extend, the valleys to subside, leaves to hide the trees, stony mountains to rise, and just as the heavens are divided into two zones, to the north and two to the south, with a fifth and hotter between them, so the god carefully marked out the enclosed matter with the same number, and described as many regions on the earth. The equatorial zone is too hot to be habitable. The two poles are covered by deep snow, and he placed two regions in between and gave them a temperate climate mixing heat and cold. Air overhangs them, heavier than fire by as much as water's weight is lighter than the earth. There he ordered the clouds and vapors to exist, and thunder to shake the minds of human beings, and winds that create lightning bolts and flashes. The world's maker did not allow these either to possess the air indiscriminately, as it is they are scarcely prevented from tearing the world apart, each with its blast steering a separate course, like the discord between brothers. Eurus, the east wind, drew back to the realms of Aurora, to Nabatea, Persia, and the heights under the morning light. Evening and the coasts that cool in the setting sun are close to Zephyrus, the west wind. Chill Boreas, the north wind, seized Scythia and the seven stars of the plow, while the south wind, Auster, drenches the lands opposite with incessant clouds and rain. Above these, he placed the transparent, weightless heavens free of the dross of earth. He had barely separated out everything within fixed limits when the constellations that had been hidden for a long time in dark fog began to blaze out through the whole sky. And so that no region might lack its own animate things, beings, the stars, and the forms of gods occupied the floor of heaven. The sea gave a home to the shining fish. Earth took the wild animals, and the light air flying things. And yet, there was no animal capable of higher thought that could be ruler of all the rest. Then humankind was born. Either the Creator God, source of a better world, seeded it from the divine, or the newborn earth, just drawn from the highest heavens, still contained fragments related to the skies, so that Prometheus, blending them with streams of rain, molded them into an image of the all-controlling gods. While other animals looked downwards at the ground, he gave human beings an upturned aspect, commanding them to look toward the skies and, upright, raise their face to the stars. So the earth, that had been a moment ago uncarved and imageless, changed and assumed the unknown shapes of human beings. So I'm going to stop there. I'll come back to this account briefly, but roughly what we have there is the same account that we have in terms of what it's covering with Genesis 1. We have the creation at the end of it all of humanity. Note that, well, I said I'd make my comment afterwards, so I'm not going to contradict what I said I would do. So let me read the Genesis account, and then we'll comment. Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, above the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work after he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So, let me comment about this. Did you see the echoes in the two accounts? A lot of some, like the progressive account? Sure. The other account was written, I think, around 19 AD. I would have to look that up, actually. It's a very good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Why do I have 19 AD in my head? What will Wikipedia? Oh, Genesis written far before it. Ovid is not doing anything new. It says 8 AD is Ovid. And Genesis comes from Moses. But Ovid in his Metamorphoses, he's not coming up with anything new. He's combining and giving an account of what he has heard from various sources. Hesiod would be one, but I mean, when it comes to, let me get rid of this. When it comes to the creation of man, he's not even sure how it. He gives two accounts. One of them, that either the Creator, God's source of a better world, seeded it from the divine. In other words, there's something divine about human nature. There's God in us, like the spark of the divinity is put into us. That's one account. And the other is that Prometheus is a titan who opposed the Olympian gods and was cast down to the earth. Prometheus stole fire from the gods, actually in this account, blended them with streams of rain and molded them in the image of these gods. So it's an inferior being. Prometheus did this, that created man out of clay. Prometheus plasticator, as he's called by theologians. That's where. So it's either we're scooped from the divinity, there are sparks of God in us, or we came from the earth and it was created by a rebel, Prometheus, who's fighting against the Olympian titans. And by alluding to both accounts, he's saying there are aspects that are true in both of human nature. One of them, that there's something of divinity in mankind, and the other, there's something of the rebel against the gods that's in the whole account. That's what he's doing there. Note in Genesis, we see nothing of the sort. There's no confusion about it or about who did the creating. It's God that did it, and there's only one God. It's not one of the gods. It's not a God, it's God. And it is literally created. This is a word that's used in Hebrew specifically, and it's translated in English not so carefully because we only have one word for creation in English, but in languages like German and French, there's a special verb that is dedicated to this creative act. In German, it's schöpfen. And the creator is the Schöpfer. But that type of creation, that verb is specifically dedicated to God's creative acts. Here, God creates everything. And there's nothing before it. Note it says in the beginning. So this is where we get the doctrine. It's not explicit here, it's explicit elsewhere in one of the Psalms, that God creates everything out of nothing. Ex nihilo. Creatio ex nihilo is the theological doctrine that will emerge out of this. There's no pre-existing matter. In the account here in Ovid, what is the beginning of things? It's the primal chaos. The consequence of things beginning in chaos is that they are normed and they return to chaos. The ultimate nature of reality for Ovid is that life and everything in it is chaotic. So when chaos breaks out and we say, this is terrible because we like order, Ovid says the nature of reality, the ultimate nature of reality is chaos. You can't stop the chaos because that's the nature of reality. It's always changing. You want order? I understand the desire for order, but you can't change the nature of reality, and reality is ultimately chaotic. Not so in Genesis. In Genesis, God creates in an orderly fashion, and that is the fundamental nature of reality. It's orderly. It's created out of nothing by a creator who not only gives us order, separation of things, light from darkness, water from land, water from air, different types and different kinds of creatures, all very distinct, male from female, distinct things. Not only does he create them to be distinct, he says that it's good. Did you note the refrain? It was good? No reference to that in Ovid at all. The account of the origins of things, there's no suggestion of good or evil. It's just there. This is what happened. In the Genesis account, it tells us that the creation of an orderly, separated, distinct, binary to some degree created order, because there's a lot of this versus that, he calls it good. And that suggests something about the God who creates it. Namely, he's good. We would get no such idea from Ovid that the God or whatever it is that originated all these things had any relationship with good or evil at all. So that also jumps out at me. It's the refrain. Note also that it is iterated in a 6-day creation cycle, and the 7th is a day of rest, from which we then get the 7-day week. And so the timeline of God's creation is presented as orderly and structured in accordance with human time, even though he clearly operates outside space and time because he pre-exists the creation that he brings about. Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Even the place that we associate with God, he creates that, which means that he's there before that. So then we get the non-created being of God. And in theology, you'll talk about, even in terms of the Trinity, the immanent Trinity, that is the Trinity we experience, or that is outside space and time, rather, and the economic Trinity that acts in space and time. It's the same Trinity, of course, but it's experienced differently. We experience the economic Trinity, the work of the household of God on earth, and here is the evidence of that. Everything we see around us is the evidence of the work of God. Now, we can see that there is more than one God, by the way, with the repeated reference to we in the text. Let us, especially when it comes to the creation of mankind, which bears the image of God. And note that there are two that are said to be in the image of God there, male and female. This is not a proof of the Trinity by any means, but it does suggest that there's not just a solitary idea or individual behind this. There's something of a collaborative venture involved. In John's gospel, it begins clearly echoing this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And by him were all things created. So connecting it with the Word being the second person of the Trinity, and thereby working with that God, the Creator, is actually also the Redeemer, because we're going to connect the Word of God with Jesus and so forth. Again, connecting with that, I'm already giving you too many texts, so let me not confuse you with even more, but I just want to say this is a very rich text. So again, it begins not in chaos, but out of nothing, and then in order. And the order was good. This is why Christian services of worship are to be governed by order. They're not to be governed by chaos. They don't happen like mystery cults do in the darkness. They happen, they're public, they're not secret ceremonies. They're open, public places that it's a declaration of something about the nature of God and also the nature of order. With the lights on, when I was in pastoral ministry about 10 years ago, I remember somebody saying it would be really cool and the young people would really like it if it was just like we did it in the dark. And there was just the, and I was like, no, we're not going to do the pagan mystery cult copying of worship service where nobody knows where anything is, and it's sort of, you may think it's funky, but it contradicts things that are true of Christian worship service. They're to be involved in the light and with truth, and not in darkness and mystery and obscurity. There's revelation here. We want to show that by what we do, and we want that to be seen as well, not just heard. As much as the gospel is heard audibly, we also want to see something of that. And God said, let there be light right away, and there was light. Now, interestingly, I don't know if you noticed this, but when he says, let there be light, and there was light, there's no sun or moon yet. Do you notice that? Isn't that interesting? Because the creation of the sun and the moon comes here. When does that happen? On the fourth day. This will take theologians are really going to have to engage with this. Well, what's going on here? There's light before the sun and the moon. The sun and the moon are going to govern the heavens. They're not going to govern the earth. You're going to notice that as well. By the way, it says about the sun and the moon that they rule over the heavens. It will say that Adam and Eve, who are the names of these people that we've not yet just had named, but the male and the female, they will rule over the earth. So they're two rulers, and they're in some sense established there by God to rule in their spheres under his greater rule. So they're stewards, if you will. And the mandate given to Adam and Eve in Genesis 6, so verse 29 here, I'm jumping ahead and back, so forgive me for this. Be fruitful and multiply. First commandment given to Adam and Eve, by the way, is to be fruitful and multiply, to fill and subdue the earth, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds, and every living creature that moves on the earth. That's a command to fill and subdue the earth. What does God do here? He subdues the earth, he separates things, and then he fills it. So it's like a mirror image. He subdues it, separates light from darkness, water from land, and then he fills it with stuff. Adam and Eve are supposed to do the opposite. They fill it with people, and then they subdue it and bring it in conformity with God's command, which is why having children is not an optional command. It's the first command, because it's the means of God's dominion through people. You have to have people. The whole earth is going to be brought. So it's a to some degree, everything's completed in the first 7 days, except that it isn't. Now it's handover to the human race. Now you are going to do what I have done and bring my goodness, everything that I call good, everything that I call light. You're going to make the whole earth filled with that light. That's the charge given to them. Does that make sense? You don't see this in the account of Ovid at all. As I say, it begins in primal chaos. Things are separated, yes, but the chaos is ended by a God. Who knows? He doesn't know. He's not going to even guess which God it is. He doesn't know, but it has to be some greater power, so he calls it a God. And then things separate into their parts, but there's not a separation in terms of the binary opposition. There's no suggestion of days, and there's no suggestion of goodness to it. It just is. And then the 5 zones and the 4 winds, and then the creation of humankind. What we now get, and I'm going to go to Ovid here and read this because I think you're going to find it significant as well, is Ovid's account of the fall, which isn't really an account of the fall at all, but it's an account of all the things that we attribute with the fall of humanity and with the original sin and so forth, which is things like war, pestilence, hunger, famine, drought, disease, all those things. Where does the evil come from? So now he begins with an account of history, and he does it in accordance with the Greek and Roman view of history, which is cyclical. There are 4 ages. There's a golden age, there's a silver age, there's a bronze age, and there's an iron age. In terms of the stories that we just read, the 2 epics, they take place in the Bronze Age, when heroes walk the earth. It's sometimes called the heroic age. This is when Odysseus lived. This is when Achilles lived. This is when Aeneas lived. There are some characters that are born of God, or the gods, and also born of men. So there are these beings that are seemingly superhuman. That's the heroic age. That's the Bronze Age. We don't live in that age. We live in the Iron Age. The Iron Age has almost no goodness left in it. It's bitter and harsh and bloody and savage. That's the age we live in. But the beginning of it all is the Golden Age. So let me just read these through very quickly if I can. Remember, it just left off with the creation of Adam, or not Adam, but of mankind, who had an upright aspect. In other words, they stood on their 2 feet with their face upwards rather than their face downwards, looking upwards. And remember the 2 accounts of that creation. Either we come from the divine, or we're rebels against the divine because Prometheus created us. So that tension between us and the gods. They're greater than us, but we resent them, and we want to become like them. We want to overthrow them. That's there as well. The hostility between mankind and the gods is implicit in the account. It's really explicit if you go to Hesiod, the account of the fight amongst the gods and so forth. But let me go to the Golden Age. This was the Golden Age that, without coercion, without laws, spontaneously nurtured the good and the true. So everything in the beginning was good. There was no fear or punishment. There was no threatening words to be read, fixed in bronze, no crowd of suppliants fearing the judge's face. They lived safely without protection. No pine tree felled in the mountains had yet reached the flowing waves to travel to the other lands. Human beings only knew their own shores. So there's no travel, there's no sea travel. They just stayed where they were. There were no steep ditches surrounding towns, no straight war trumpets, no coiled horns, no swords and helmets. Without the use of armies, people passed their lives in gentle peace and security. The earth herself also, freely, without the scars of plows, untouched by hoes, produced everything from itself. There was no agriculture. Fruit came on the trees, fell. Tasty fruit. You didn't need to do what you do in agriculture, which is to take two different types of apple trees and marry them together, graft one into the other, and you create from a wild apple a domestic apple. So it's tasty. It was already as good as it ever is going to be. That's how it was in the beginning. And there was no need to work. There's no work in the beginning, in the golden age. It's an age of vegging out and delighting. That's all that happened here. Contented with food that grew without cultivation, they collected mountain strawberries and the fruit of the strawberry tree, wild cherries, blackberries clinging to the tough brambles, and acorns fallen from Jupiter's spreading oak tree. Spring was eternal, and gentle breezes caressed with warm air the flowers that grew without being seeded. Then the untilled earth gave of its produce, and without needing renewal, the fields whitened with heavy ears of corn. Sometimes rivers of milk flowed, sometimes streams of nectar, and golden honey trickled from the green holm oak. That's how it was in the beginning. When Saturn was banished to gloomy Tartarus and Jupiter ruled the world. Who's Jupiter in relation to Saturn? His son. How does the father get banished to the underworld? Rebellion. Civil war amongst the gods. That's how the degeneration of the golden age begins. It begins with the gods. There's a fight. And it's an unjust one. A son rises up against the father. And Jupiter ruled the world. Then came the people of the age of silver, that is inferior to gold, more valuable than yellow bronze. Jupiter shortened spring's first duration and made the year consist of 4 seasons. Remember, before it was only spring. It's always fruitful, and the harvest comes out of it. Now we have 4 seasons: winter, summer, changeable autumn, and brief spring. Then parched air first glowed white, scorched with heat, and ice hung down frozen by the wind. Then houses were first made for shelter. You didn't have to sleep under shelter before. It was always temperate. Now you need shelter to protect you from the elements in the 4 seasons. Before that, homes had been made in caves and dense thickets or under branches fastened with bark. Then seeds of corn were first buried in the long furrows. Agriculture begins. And bullocks groaned, burdened under the yoke. They've got to pull the plow to till the earth, to create scars along the back of the earth. You put the seed in it and then it grows up. So work is happening. Third came the people of the Bronze Age with fiercer natures, readier to indulge in savage warfare, but not yet vicious. The harsh Iron Age was last. Immediately, every kind of wickedness erupted into this age of baser natures. Truth, shame, and honor vanished. In their place were fraud, deceit, and trickery, violence, and pernicious desires. They set sails to the wind. Okay, so now we get sea travel. Though as yet the seamen had poor knowledge of their use, and the ship's keels that once were trees standing amongst high mountains now leapt through uncharted waves. The land was once common to all, as the light of the sun is, and the air was marked out to its furthest boundaries by wary surveyors. Not only did they demand the crops and the food the rich soil owed them, but they entered the bowels of the earth. And excavating brought up the wealth it had concealed in Stygian's shade. A little Tolkien-esque. They delved too deeply in the earth. And what are they getting? Gold, silver, metal, precious stones. Wealth that incites men to crime. And now harmful iron appeared, and gold more harmful than iron. War came, whose struggles employ both, waving clashing arms with blood-stained hands. They lived on plunder. Friend was not safe with friend. Relative with relative. Kindness was rare between brothers. Husbands longed for the death of their wives. Wives for the death of their husbands. Murderous stepmothers mixed deadly aconite, and sons inquired into their father's years before their time. Piety was dead, and virgin Astrea, last of all the immortals to depart, herself abandoned the blood-drenched earth. And that's the account of the Iron Age then, there. And then the War of the Giants, and then the Jupiter threatening to destroy humankind, etc. Note we have an account of a gradual, or rather a cyclical account of the fall of not just the human race, because the human race didn't exist at first, but the whole of the world, the evolved world order. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. But it begins with the degeneration that takes place at the level of the gods. It's not caused by human actions. Right? There's no original sin. No human being did anything to provoke this. It happened when Jupiter rebelled against Saturn, thus degenerated all things. And yet in that account of the four ages, we get the idea of the seasons and a cyclical type of thing that will give account to the Greco-Roman view of history as well, which is that it is a cycle, and what comes at the end of the Iron Age is the return to the Golden Age, which is what Virgil just talked about in the Aeneid. With Augustus Caesar Augustus, there is an appeal to the return of the Golden Age and a Pax Romana to an account where it'll be something like this, where there'll be no coercion, there'll be no laws, where food will just spontaneously appear, where we won't need shelters and so forth. That sort of account of the Golden Age is being suggested by Virgil. As I said to you, I don't think Virgil himself believes it. Virgil knows that a Golden Age is going to sound a lot more like this, and it's not going to sound like, we have the peace of Rome, which means do what we say or we're going to kill you. So we're at peace now, aren't we, brother? Yes, whatever you say, Caesar. Hail Caesar. We have a tyrant, in other words, who will crush all opposition. That's peace. Well, it is a sort of a peace. Anyway, questions about that account in Ovid? Yes?
This is more so going back to the creation story, but
okay.
One interpretation I heard about the Genesis account was when he's creating the earth, he's going from the ground up. He starts with the water, starts with the land, starts with the sky. And I heard one interpretation that was God symbolically building the temple.
Yes.
Is that similar thought in Ovid as well, or?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
No, did you see it there at all?
I mean, I know temples were a big deal in ancient religions, especially with the Jewish people as well, so I wasn't sure if maybe among the Greeks there's similarity. Yeah,
there's amongst Old Testament scholars, there's a lot of observations now about how the Genesis account, the orderliness, the priestliness of Adam and so forth, God walking with Adam in the garden has echoes of the account of the temple, the Jewish temple, very much so. And I think there's merit in that, actually. I didn't want to get into that because I wanted to compare the two accounts. I don't see anything like that in the Ovid's account. Again, it begins in chaos. And to me, that's a key issue, that it begins in chaos. And then ultimately, when things degenerate from the gold into the silver, well, it's almost inevitable. Of course they did, because there was war in the beginning. The chaos is marked by discord. There's no order. There's no sense of good and evil. It's just chaos. It's not that it's evil that rules. It's that there is neither rules. It's flipping around. It's constant change. And that's the effect of Ovid's account, is that morality does not hold. There's no basis for morality, because ultimate reality is just chaotic. So to appeal to good, as the Genesis account does, is to appeal to something fanciful. That's not the way things are ultimately. You may want them to be good, you may want order, but if you're going to bring about order, you're going to have to do it through means that we're going to describe as normally as very evil through war, and through gold, and through, as he said, those two elements, gold and iron, which we associate with most of human ills, because the one is the means by which the other is paid for. You pay armies and you buy iron implements to wage war on your enemies, and you can bring about a peace by annihilating your opposition to the point where they're not willing to resist you anymore. But when you do that, you're always afraid, because the ultimate reality is chaos, that for all of your hold on the world and the strength of your rule, that it can't last, because change is inevitable. Revolution is coming. Somebody's going to stab you in the back. All the tyrants of ancient Rome thought this. Herod thought this. This is why he sent orders to kill the babe of Bethlehem. He heard that there was a king. The King of Kings was coming. He said, oh, I really want to hear about that. That's so interesting. Tell me where he is so I can go worship him. And it's like, yeah, you're going to worship him, right? Can't find him. Okay, we'll kill all those under 2 years old. I have to annihilate the threat to my power. That's what they think. That my power is as absolute as I hold it, is only as going to be holding as long as I have the strength to hold it. And the only way I'm going to secure it is by killing all of my opponents. And those will chiefly lie in his own household. By the way, terrible thing about the rulers of the ancient world is that they are worse to their own families. Because that's the person who people will say has some legitimacy, and they will back them just to get the guy in charge out. So the no reign is secure in a realm where chaos is the origin of things, and where there is no ultimate justice and good God behind it all. So it is a chaotic and brutal world that the gospel and the account in Genesis speaks into. It's a very different account, like very different. Let me dig down on this feature here. I talked about this, but this one in particular, because it's too big not to give it a little bit of time. I mentioned to you that, and I think I said it early on in the course, that the account of the creation of Adam and Eve has echoes. Well, you saw it already in Ovid, a little bit of the image of God. Where is it? Prometheus molded them into an image of the all-controlling gods, into an image of them. But he did it to really cheese off the Olympian gods. He made them look like the gods. Right? It's Prometheus who did this. Prometheus is a titan. He's a rebel. He's an earthborn god. And the Olympians are the skyborn gods. He creates Adam and Eve as his allies in a common war against the supremacy of heaven, and wants to make them overthrow the heavenly born gods. So in that sense, they bear the image of God as a middle finger up to the gods. Like, even the very nature of humanity makes the gods hate us. It's suggested in the narrative. It's implied. But also that there's something divine in us. Well, if it's divine in us, then it wants supremacy. It's not going to be satisfied with being a part of the earth. It wants supremacy over the gods. So a great deal of tension between the gods and man in this account. Whereas here, we already have said that God's character is good, because it's a refrain in the account. But there's nothing of enmity between God and man in this account. Because even at the end of it, God blessed them. He created them and God blessed them. And God saw everything that was done, he had made, and behold, it was very good for the first time. It was very good, not just good, but very good. Evening, morning, the sixth day. Everything was done in accordance with his nature, according to his word, and in accordance with his good nature, including the creation of man and woman in his image, male and female, he sees this as good as well. There's no sense of hostility or enmity between God and man at this point. Right? It's wholly good. Very important to see the beginnings. It doesn't stay there, but it begins there. The other thing you can say about what does it mean to be in the image of God? This is a good question that's not answered here, by the way, in the text. It's not actually answered. I will say one thing it is not. It's that it's not referring to a physical likeness. One thing it is not. First of all, we have no sense of what God looks like from this account, so it wouldn't make a great deal of sense. But secondly, when it comes later in Exodus, we're told not to make idols in the image of anything. We're not to make idols and worship them, but we are to worship God. So in other words, there's nothing created. You could even create an idol of a man. We're made in the image of God. Well, let's make an image of a man, and that will be like worshiping God, isn't it? No, you must not do that. By the way, the household gods that Aeneas would have been little figurines of his family, and he would have worshipped them. Little likenesses, images of his ancestors. He carries them around with him in a little pouch, puts them out on the hearth, does homage to his ancestors who bear the image of the gods for him. So he's worshiping his ancestors there. It still happens in Eastern cultures, ancestor worship. Many cultures, actually. Not North American. We hate our parents. We're taught to do that, at any rate. Whether we do or not is a different matter, but we're taught to despise them. I'll get to that later on the course. We're taught to think of ourselves as orphans. That's the image that's presented to us. An orphan has no parents. So if you think of yourself as having no parents, then you're wishing your parents dead. So is that sufficient? If you think of yourself in terms of an orphan, you have to think of your parents as having no legitimacy over you in any way. It just goes with it. But here, the account in his own image, it cannot be a physical description. It has to do something with what we know about God here in the account already. Well, one thing is he created mankind to be good. God is good. We're in his own image. He created us to be good. And he says that the whole of everything that he's done is very good. So we were created good. Not in the sense of the golden age, where everything happens, there's no separation, there's no work. Oh, no work? Multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. And behold, I've given it, you shall have them. And every plant yielding seedlets on the face of the earth, and you shall have them for food. But to multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish, you're supposed to go to work, in other words. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to bring this under your dominion. You're going to have to commit yourselves to agriculture. You're going to commit yourselves to animal husbandry. You're going to look after the animals. You're going to look after the fish. You're going to look after the plants. You're going to be involved in gardening. Adam and Eve are placed in a garden, it says later in Genesis 2. They're gardening right from the beginning when it's still good. Work is not a product of the fall. Work is a product of God's good created order. If you're not working, the Apostle Paul says you shouldn't eat. Don't think that we're back in the golden age where everything comes to you and everybody gives you everything. You're supposed to work. It's good that you work. It's good for a man to work. It's good for a woman to work. We have an area of dominion. It's how we will be blessed. If the work's not very satisfying, well, that's because work is cursed because of original sin. But work in and of itself is a good thing to do as long as it's not immoral. But that's there in this account. Again, very different from the account that Ovid just gave. So mankind is good. What else do we know about mankind? Okay, so let me see here. Remember that on the 6th day, so it's the 5th day, on the 6th day, mankind is created, but not just mankind. What else is created on the 6th day? The living creatures, according to their kinds, the livestock, the creeping things, the beasts of the earth, according to their kinds. It sounds a lot like the birds and the fish right? But now it's just the ground animals. So is Adam just another ground animal? It seems like it's not, although it's still the sixth day. There's something different about this. And the different thing is that God speaks everything into being, but he only speaks to one creature. Only one. And God said to them. And God said, let there be light. And God said this, and then it happens. But he never speaks to anyone, right? This is the first time he speaks to someone. He addresses them. Note that. It's a subtle, you almost would not notice it because it's all God speaking and things happening, and here he speaks and it happens. But for the first time, he's speaking to someone. Before he's creating some things. Now he's a someone. That someone is a person. These people bear his image. We get the concept of human personhood here. In the Babylonian text and the ancient Near Eastern text, to bear the image of God, I said this to you a month ago, you might have forgotten it now, to bear the image of God is something that only the kings were said to have. To be in Imago Dei, to bear the image of God is to be a king, to be like Pharaoh or Nebuchadnezzar or Augustus Caesar. They bear the image of gods. They're the superiors. They're like the gods and they're going to become gods. They're going to become like Augustus would be, or Aeneas at the end of his life would become a star in the firmament. It's going to be sort of upgraded. But here he says it about the human race in general. The whole of the human race has a dignity that comes from bearing God's image. These are the first two. Note that they're also two. Note that they're also adults. They're not babies. They're not emerging from chaos. They're not emerging from the ground. We'll get that account in Genesis 2, where God breathes into them the breath of life. But right here, he creates them male and female according to his word. And he speaks to them. If you speak to somebody and you command them to do something, what does it suggest about the relationship? If I tell you to do something, what am I assuming of you? You ought to do it. So there's a relationship of authority. But even more basic than that, you can hear me. And you can respond to me. And because you can respond to me, you're responsible to me. So they're responsible, they're able to respond with their own words, with their own actions, and they're also responsible to God, and for which reason he makes them stewards over all of creation. Right? He says to Adam and Eve, the first male and female, have dominion over the fish, the birds, the land creatures. No, it doesn't talk about other human beings. There are no other human beings at this point. There's just the two. But that will come as a later iteration of this because they're also to be fruitful and multiply. Well, soon there will be other people. He hasn't got into that yet, and he couldn't have got into it at this point. But note all those things. So we're made in the image of God, means that he speaks and we speak then. And speech is somehow connected to our human nature. That doesn't mean you're not human if you are not yet able to speak, but you have the capacity for speech. And with the capacity for speech, and remember even later that in John's gospel, it talks about that same creator being the Logos of God, which means that we have the capacity for speech, but also we have the capacity for understanding, logic. We can think about things. We can think about things logically. We can say that's true and that's false. That's good and that's evil. We can think with a logical mind, just like God. So there's an attribute of human nature that's implicated in the Imago Dei here as well. Now this is a sort of a deep dive into it to some degree, but I'm only scratching the surface of this. It has other implications here. But note that it's not like we're like the other animals created on the sixth day. Totally distinct. Yes, on the sixth day. in that sense similar. But there's no sense of a common evolutionary account a la Darwin or something like that. It's not possible from the account. And for which reason, if you wanted to do that, you'd have to talk about the days being extraordinarily long periods of time to make it plausible, for which the text gives us no warrant whatsoever. And I'm not interested in getting into that whole chestnut today, but just to compare the Metamorphoses account of Ovid with the Genesis account. So this capacity for speech, this capacity for understanding, having a moral nature just like God, and also being accountable to God, and being in his native dignity righteous like God. We have an inbuilt sense of justice. Remember I talked about that in Plato? In other words, there's a sense of justice in people. It's deeply embedded in them. Why? Because we bear the image of God. That's why. Animals don't sense injustice. They sense weakness. Dominance behavior, sure. Hierarchy, yeah, but that's not justice. This is power. It's a pecking order. That's not justice. The best bird doesn't win. The strongest bird wins in the pecking order. Pecks down the others. You can kill them off. Maybe that's bullying. I don't know. It's just that's the way the natural world is. That's not the way the human world is. That's not the same thing. We have a sense of right and wrong in that bullying, pecking order thing, right? Okay, so, and on the seventh day, God rests. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, I gave an account of the gold and the silver, the bronze, the Iron Age. And with this, interestingly, war between the giants and the Olympian gods arises, which gives to starts to expand the canvas into other beings, and human beings will get implicated in the giant side of the quarrel because we're from the earth. So we're rebels against the gods, although the gods are actually responsible for it, as we saw. When Jupiter overthrew his father Saturn, he created the downstream terrible consequences of things getting worse and worse and worse. In the Genesis account, it's very different. They're given a prohibition. I'm not going to read the whole account because I will run out of time now. I have probably 15 minutes here. But we're told of a tree in the garden, a prohibition. Put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. 2 commands. Work it and keep it. What does it mean to keep it? It means to guard it. Don't let anything evil come into it. And work it, make what is good flourish. Isn't that interesting? Work it. Why would you work it if it's already good and perfect? Because you can make it even better. Not improve on it, but make what is already good flourish. Now, to make what is good flourish, you have to do it in conformity with what's already good. You can't mix it with evil. You can't put 2 separate things and mix them together and create a new thing. And that'll be really obvious when we come to the book of Leviticus, where it talks about the separation of even garments and stuff like that. Like, don't mix your wool with your whatever. Clothing, it sounds a little bit weird sometimes. Like, why are you worrying about clothing and garments and stuff like that? Because God's interested in holiness everywhere is the first answer, but that it holds true everywhere. And it gets into morality, sexual relations, and ways of worshiping God. But there are clear directives on what's holy and what's unholy at that point. Well, that's after the fall. At this point, not. Question or comment? It's not yet happened. There is no evil. But whereas in the account in Ovid, chaos is already there, and I would say chaos is one of the effects of evil, is chaos. When your life falls apart and is thrown into chaos, when the orders of your life, like your family, a family member dies, a family member gets cancer, there's infidelity, there's a murder, whatever, and your family social fabric breaks, you tend to break along with it. People, not just the individual who's been stricken, but the people connected to the family are blighted by that same sense of chaos and lack of order and righteousness. And even There's a distinct awareness that something bad has happened. It's not just somebody has got sick, it's that there's something unholy that's happened in your family, and you are profoundly psychologically affected by that. There's nothing in that in the beginning, because death does not yet happen. Death is a consequence of sin, and sin has not yet happened. And it was not going to happen if Adam had done what he was told. He took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work and keep it, and God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Okay, first reference to death. By the way, when you come to grade Genesis 4, which I'm not going to read, in Genesis 1, we get the refrain, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. In Genesis 4, we'll get the account, and he died. And he died. And he died. Over and over and over. If you wanted to see them as like parallels or responsiveness, here's how it was in the beginning, and here's how it is now. Life, goodness, righteousness, order, chaos, evil, death, more sin. It keeps on getting worse. But on the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Note that the evil will be done by Adam, who thereby has clearly got the freedom to disobey. I already said that he was commanded, he was able to respond, but he's also able to disobey. That's clear from the commandment that's given. Because God hypothesizes, if you will, what will happen if he doesn't do it. If you do this, here I'm going to spell it very clearly what will happen. You will die. Does Adam have any idea what that means? Probably not. Doesn't sound very good. That's again for theologians to tease out. Is it spiritual death? Is it physical death? Is it both? All those sorts of things. But note this also, and it reiterates and expands on something I said earlier in Genesis 1. The Lord God said, it's not good that that man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him. Note he says for the first time, it's not good that man should be alone. Well, in Genesis 1, he's already created the two. He's seeing it from the macro level. But in Genesis 2, what's being suggested is there's something good about male, female, complementary existence. It's good when they're together, which again suggests something, although I don't want to draw too strong an analogy, between the relations within God himself, a relation. But it is suggesting something that the ancient world almost always denies, which is that women bear the image of God and that they're good. It's clear. And not only that there's something of the two together which completes the other. That's really quite interesting and profound. It says something about the family, by the way. The legitimacy of the family is related to the commandment. It's the first order of society, by the way. You will get competing versions of where social order comes into being from different accounts. Not from Ovid, but he doesn't talk about the family at all. Ovid doesn't talk about the family. He has no interest in the family, gives no legitimacy to the family. The legitimacy is in the chaos. Here it's in the family unit of the woman and the man, and they're, as Jesus says, the two become flesh. And Adam, when he sees Eve, he says, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, basically shouting out hallelujah. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. And then the commentary, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Extraordinary passage. Everything that's separated. Separated, it's good. Separated, it's good. Separated, it's good. It's good. The unity there. It sort of, I said this about the Creator in the first 6 days. He separates everything and then he fills it. Right? He fills it with water, air, land, animals. he creates Adam and Eve. The two together bear his image. He separates them, says they're distinct, and he says it's not good for them to be alone. He brings them together and say, but that's the means of dominion over the earth. So something profoundly said about the relation between male and female, and the importance to a person's even sense of identity. We talk about identity. I made a great deal about identity in relation to Socrates and, know thyself and stuff like that. Knowing thyself is here connected to knowing the female if you're a male and male if you're a female in a particular way, in a unique way. Again, it's just saying a little bit here. It gets expanded on hugely in the subsequent narration in Genesis. But now we get the account of the fall and the serpent coming in, asking questions. And did God actually say? To the woman, he says, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden, playing dumb. And the woman said to the serpent, you may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. By the way, that was never said, neither shall you touch it. Where on earth did she get that from? But she's added a little extra prohibition. Can't even touch it. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. You will ascend. You'll be like one of the heavenly beings. He invites the idea of you will overthrow him. It's like a Jupiter-Saturn type thing. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, what does it mean by good now? Not that it was tasty, but that it was good to make her like a god. That's the goodness. She defines the goodness now, and it means being superior to what she is. In other words, treating God, who created everything good for her, as if he were withholding from her something that's good. Worse than that, the tree was desired to make one wise. She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. What's that guy doing? Adam. The serpent's talking to Eve. Adam, to whom the commandment was to guard and to keep the garden. He's not keeping the evil out. The evil's there, and he's talking to his wife, and he's sitting there. Nothing. He's got nothing to say. Is he tending the garden? No. Is he keeping it righteous? No. He's standing there, and Eve is getting talked to by the serpent. She takes a bite and gives it to him, and he goes, wow. He agrees with her rebellion. He's sitting there. He's like, is his statue. Till she gives him the food, and he's like, oh, this will be good. We can become like gods. I like this. He sees that it's good. According to whose standard is it good? According to their standard. But their standard is that it makes them superior. It makes them above God. They want to be as gods. That's the original sin. It's the temptation. God allows this temptation to take place, by the way. They try and protect themselves with loincloths. I'm going to get to this next semester when I talk about Milton's Paradise Lost. We'll really get into this narrative here. But again, just note how different the account is of this from everything that we get in Ovid. The account of evil stems from Adam and Eve expressly disobeying the sole prohibition that was given to them. They're given a commandment, be fruitful and multiply. They're going to do that. They're given one prohibition. Don't eat of that tree. Don't, or you're going to die. They do the one thing they're told not to do. Why does God give them the commandment? Why does he allow the possibility? Philosophers will tell you that without the choice of being able to do something other than that, you can't really do anything good. Theologians will say the same. You can't love somebody if you have no choice but to do it. That's compulsion, that's coercion, that's not love. There's something of freedom and love. You have to willingly do it. The possibility of disobeying allows them to love God for his sake. It allows that very possibility. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible. But it also opens up the possibility of disobedience, of rebellion. God warns them against that. they do it anyway, the two together. Anyway, very different account than that of Ovid, and I just wanted to trace that out. If we started talking about this, we could go on for many weeks to talk about the implications of this, but I just wanted to show how different the biblical account is from that which we've had thus far on the course. Okay, and I'll just leave you with that and see you next time.